Hey everybody on here, and I'm coming to you with this month's Connecting Codes video. And I think you're going to find out why you want to have those backup plans in place. um, as we get into what's happening, we're going into some intense stuff right now. I think people are already seeing it around the world. They're already seeing things amping up, and we know that a lot of that oftentimes connects to being an election year. And for those that aren't familiar with my work, it's not really a predictive thing. I have a gift for being able to read energetic currents and how they're interacting. My work blends over 50 different modalities, none of which are used in the traditional ways. And every year I put out this book here, which is The Code Journey. And I'm currently working on 2025. It's a pretty thick book here, as you can see. Um, and it's got insights. It's got insights about what's going on in our world, what's going on in life, the types of challenges we come up against, the types of opportunities we have available to us. And it breaks it down. So it's got this overview of what's happening for the year. And then it also shows things that are connected to what is happening for the months, breaks it down that way, and it has different components within the months, and things like the lunar cycles, how that's influencing things, portals we might have from meteorite showers or um, turning of the seasons or things like that, and then also each day of the year. So we always have these opportunities. Usually there's going to be some challenges mixed into things, but the whole key is if we understand what's happening, if we understand the energetic patterns that are at play, then we have that ability to work with foresight. We have that ability to um, be prepared for things to a certain extent. I mean, we can't obviously prepare for every single little detail of things, but it certainly gives us that heads up. So we know, hey, if people are really amplified, if there's some really certain intense, aggressive energies on the front, that may not be the day to be in a big city in a protest or something like that. Um, it helps us to know where to keep our energy. And if we know people are kind of ramped up in their emotions, then we know, hey, I've got to keep myself a little more centered, a little more balanced in things. And as we do that, we can oftentimes help to at least keep ourselves safe, if nothing else, and maybe some people around us safe in that process. In there. So that's why it's here. It's not it's not all this doom and gloom. I mean, certainly we can focus on that, or we can say, okay, if this is happening, what are my opportunities within that? If the energy is intense, then what can I do to um, balance some of that energy out? If people, if we have challenging things in our health, what do I do to balance that out? Oh, I can boost my nutrients. I can get out in the sun a little bit more. I can get off of electronics more. I can make sure I'm getting extra rest, those sorts of things. So every challenge has an opportunity in it. And even when the intense things are playing out in our world events and our political leaders and the dynamics around the world, we still have opportunities because we don't have to react and play into their hand necessarily. Um, and when we don't, we can turn things around. So things that are meant to divide people, we can turn that around and make it a way that people end up coming together on things and working with each other to stand up against the injustices. So there are always ways to do it lawfully, ethically, um, in those patterns. And I realize not everybody's meant to go out and be an activist. Not everybody is meant to get down and be on the boards. There are people for that, and they're built for that, and let's support them for that. But at the same time, we also need other people that are continuing to remind people how to be kind, to, remind people to um, have a space that they can decompress in. I mean, there's every component has its place and its space and its role in things. Everybody has that piece that they can do. So we're built differently. We have different skills. We have different mindsets. We have a lot of different things. And each one of those can be a valuable piece to be integrated if we choose to do that. Now, if we don't choose to do that, then we're going to experience the harshest of the harshest pieces of things, because we're going to be in that heavy battle energy. We're going to be in that heavy aggression, and that's not where things are going to get resolved. So there's always this balance, and people say, yeah, but you can't just lay down and do nothing. Well, no, I'm not saying just lay down and do nothing. I'm just saying approach it ethically and with strength. I mean, you can be a tyrant, or you can be like a parent that says no, and says that's not happening, and still be in command of things. Just because they you know don't beat their kids or something doesn't mean that they, you know, don't have any authority or force or strength or command of the situation. So we have to balance things situation by situation, person by person, a lot of times, because the way one person can deal with things is not necessarily the way somebody else can deal with things. So in this video, we're looking at what's coming up in May and what types of things might come out on the world events front. Um, Again, this is not absolute, obviously, because it hasn't happened yet, but knowing the currents, we can look at what the probability of what types of things we might be dealing with. So again, are we going to get all those exact details? No, because I don't work off of intel. I don't work off of the corrupt plans, so to say. I don't work off of the narratives. What I work off of is the actual energy currents that are present at that time. And so here again, nothing's absolute. And again, with foresight, sometimes we can diffuse some of that a little bit and calm it down before it gets out of hand. Whereas if we didn't know about it, we would be caught in a reaction, and then it could be much worse than is planned. So with that, let's start taking a look at what do we have for our monthly influences, what's going to be the core going on in May. Um, One of the things we're going to see on the forefront is we're going to see some business deals go bad. And this is going to get very interesting because this is very particularly going to connect in with the criminal syndicates. So whether you're talking mafia groups, whether you're talking um, criminal political activists, whether you're talking world leaders that are networked into criminal syndicates, things like that. Um, these are business deals that are going to go bad because of the corruption that's involved in them. They actually can be very deadly, very dangerous, much more so than normal, So this is like the difference between, somebody going out and making a threat, like a mafia person going out and making a threat and saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to break your legs, and scaring somebody, and, just walking up and shooting them. I mean, so the business deals are going to go bad because they're being done with bad people. They're being done with people that can't be trusted. They're being done with people who don't do ethical and legitimate business in there. So we're going to see more exposure around these criminal syndicates and these networks coming up in May. And the other option to that is that we may see government or political leaders covering up for criminal syndicates. And that could be very possible too, because we do have a lot of exposure coming out. And that is also going to tell us a lot. Who is willing to cover up the criminal syndicates? Who's willing to stand up for the terrorist as opposed to standing up for the people in there? And that's also going to be there. Now, this is a time, because we have that deadly energy pattern mixed into this, that if there are whistleblowers trying to come out in May, we may see that proverbial more accident energy coming through. I say accident with those quotes, because that's what happens. Again, if you're trying to cover things up, that's what happens. Is a lot of times the person who's ready to expose something um, will then come under threat or disappear or have a proverbial accident or things like that, that go down to keep that syndicate from being exposed, to keep them from coming out. And so that, I think, we're going to see a lot of in May. We're going to see a lot of strange things like that happening. We want to really observe, and we want to stay out of other people's battles this is going to be really important because there's always this tendency, and there's been a lot of push with things. Oh, you've got to take sides, you've got to choose this, or you've got to choose that. And yet, to a certain extent, I mean, we can't be without choice. We're going to have to choose something, right? But we don't necessarily have to align with people. And again, we don't necessarily want to be involved in other people's battles. Now, we have these various wars that are going on in the world right now, and this is going to raise a lot of things that is probably going to strike a nerve with some people, and people are probably going to be more upset with us getting involved in wars of other countries, which actually have been going on for many years in many cases. You see that like the Russia-Ukraine war, it's been going on for 10 years, basically. So when you do this, we need to stay out of their business. If we don't stay out of it, we're going to find ourselves in trouble. Because in this energy pattern, if we're not observing things, if we're not minding our own business, then what we're going to do is the two people who are battling against each other are going to join forces and come against us. And this is where it's very dangerous for the US right now, because the US keeps poking its head into everybody else's battles. It keeps, you know, supporting both sides in one way or the other, and getting involved where it really shouldn't be getting involved. And what's again going to happen is these forces are going to start joining together to come after the US, because they're going to say, hey, it's like it's like you're provoking both sides of the battle, and you're funding both sides of the battle, and you're doing things on both sides of the battle. So we're starting to realize, who's actually creating the battle here, and that's not going to be good. That's not going to be good if that plays out. So we need to kind of encourage that. We need to stand up for that, for those people who are more in the activist space, who are more out there on the front lines, as I'd like to say. That is one of the things that we need to encourage, is to stay out of the involvement of other people's business, so to say. There's always going to be many perspectives, many different sides to things. And I think that that is also um, part of how we can start to settle down the division that we deal with in the world and among people, is because we're so set that one side is right or the other side is not. And it's really not about just this country or that country. What it's about is the corruption versus the people. In a lot of ways, it's the unethical versus the ethical that's coming down the pike in this. And when you look at it from these different perspectives, there's valid points usually on both sides, and there's invalid points usually on both sides in there, but it starts to give you a bigger picture of things. And a lot of times what a particular country is doing is not necessarily what the people want or what they are backing, especially if those leaders have been installed instead of truly purely elected in there. And that's in multiple countries that we see those things. You have countries where they're trying to just completely get rid of elections because they don't really do elections anyways. We saw this in Ukraine is one of those that's pushed for that, for example. And so there's always these different things. And I guess that's where we have to come down to not making it all about the Jewish people, or all about the Iranian people, or all about Ukrainian or Russia or the UK or whatever country and group of people we're talking about. Because here again, you've got good people and you've got some not so nice people in all of those factions. You've got them all the way through. So you can't just lump everybody who's Jewish or Ukrainian or Russian or whatever into that group in there. So we want to take the time to do that. Also, we see coming up in May, health becoming very vulnerable. We have things that are hitting our health and our finances during that month. And we're going to see this continual pushing of disease. Matter of fact, I've seen it even a lot more coming out in the last couple of days, more of this pushing of the avian bird flu. And now they want to shut down and not allow cattle through places, or the transporting of that. because they're claiming they're all infected with avian bird flu. Well, even if you go directly on the CDC site, there's very specific things that have to happen for the transmission of that. So unless that disease is getting in through some other means than the normal natural means for the disease to be displaced, whether they're being implemented in food or whether they're being implemented in shots or something else. Um, it's not normal for, these huge herds of cattle to suddenly be getting bird flu. And cows in particular, are not one of the animals that normally would receive transmission um, for avian bird flu. And that again, you can go on the CDC site and they'll tell you what animals normally do. And in order to have certain breedings coming through, they have to be working with more than one type of flu that has to be a human flu and not just a an avian flu in there. So, we got to really watch some of these discrepancies in there. And I've noticed too, when they put the cases out, a lot of times they're like, oh, this is such a deadly, dangerous thing. And then when you start to read about it, there's literally like one case or two cases. And when you're talking one or two cases over, millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people, this is not this is not a medical emergency. This is not a medical crisis by any means. So again, we want to be paying attention to that. We can expect that money is going to get tighter for a lot of people during this time. There may be shifts of employment in May coming up. We may see a lot more shifts happening in there. And that's going to also be a very interesting piece. We know that Biden wants to raise the capital gains tax to, I think it was 43%. Which is huge. I mean, that means a lot of people would lose their homes. A lot of people, if somebody passes away and then they inherit the home and then they endure a 43% capital gains tax, which means that, let's say you can't afford to buy that house. And so you sell the house for $500,000, you have to pay 43% out right off the top to the government. So you're, only getting what, 275, 280,000, somewhere in that range, out of a $500,000 house. So we really want to be careful of some of that. We want to be on guard with that. We want to think about other options. What would be our other options to do in there? And this is the other thing, people say, well, all of a sudden I've acquired a $500,000 home. And if I've acquired that and then I've got to pay 200, some $1,000 on taxes, where do I get that money from? So we want to think about what are our options, what are our plans, how do we handle these things? And the thing that scares me about that is the opening that leaves for property seizures, for other seizures of homes that you may already have, that you've already owned outright because you can't afford some of those things, as we've got people that will pass away. And then again, people who are already living paycheck to paycheck, and then they get hit with some sort of capital gains tax. I think it's going to get really challenging in that way for some people. So we really want to rethink. We really want to be resourceful with our money during this time. We really want to stick to the necessities and not the extras going on during this time. That's just a basic common sense plan of action, so to say, in there. The shifts of employment, what are we going to see? We're going to see more jobs going to AI and illegal aliens. Now, we know I talked about this last month where Tyson cleared out most of their employees, like 1,400 employees, and then gave jobs to the illegal aliens that were coming in to the country. We have a lot of jobs that are currently being replaced with AI, which includes things like cashier positions, stocking positions, We see it a lot like with Amazon, they're using the drones instead of delivery drivers. So we're going to continue to see more and more stuff automated in there. There's a lot of positions, even like online things, like checking certain things, programs, validating certain things, researching certain things, all of those types of jobs getting replaced. And so I just saw that the fourth quarter had the first quarter of our year had a huge, is looking like it's going to have a huge drop off, a huge um, detriment to it, and in the fiscal area of the United States. And so when we see these things, again, we're going to have to get back to taking care of us, because a lot of people are already working 2 or 3 jobs. They're already putting in the maximum that they can put in. And if they start losing those jobs, it's not just a lot of people, again, they're living on the basics to start with right now. So if they start losing jobs, if they start um, having things come around or they get sick, I mean, a few days even of being sick for most people is incredibly detrimental. They might not be able to buy food that week or things like that. So it gets very hard. It gets very tough to make these decisions, but it's very important to take the time to get the rest you need. And this is going to cause people to come back and evaluate things, reprioritize things in their life. And they're going to have to start saying, look, I can't do all of these extra things. I've got to get my rest. Rethinking, how do I maximize my nutrition? How can I get some time outside so I can get the nutrients from the sun, so that I can breathe in, next to some trees and actually get the benefits of that? Sounds silly, but it's physiologically proven in there. So those are the types of things that we're going to see this shift more towards value, and people are going to start saying, well, if I've got to so-called suffer, if I've got to so-called not have a lot, then I'm going to do what makes me happy versus just what is making me miserable that I'm doing for money. So we're going to see a lot of the shifting, I think, in employment, in jobs, in the workforce starting to come through in May, and a lot of things coming up around that. Now, a lot of people have said, I don't know, you've talked about lockdowns again, you've talked about these restrictions coming up again, and we haven't necessarily seen it, and I don't see that happening um, because of everybody's too awake, too aware to these methods. Well, get ready, because I've been saying it's going to be around May, June time frame that we're going to come into this. And what is happening as we get into the influences of May, we see attempts to isolate people coming through. And a lot of people say, yeah, but people are never going to go for another pandemic. Maybe not. But what they're trying to implement right now is these climate emergency orders that give them the same orders, so the same powers. So Biden would have the same powers that Trump had during 2020 with the pandemic then, and it would be done under the aspect of a climate emergency. And so he's already being pushed to declare a climate emergency, because he's run out of, I think, the COVID things. He's nursed that for 4 years, basically, aspects of it that he can. So how does that play out then? How does that look? Because you think to yourself, well, how can you lock people down over a climate emergency? Well, okay, one thing of climate emergency is what they're doing with the cattle and the avian bird flu. And we see that, we've got the health vulnerabilities there. So there are different things when you have weather things, when you have massive flooding, when you have things like that, that actually can be a cause to spread disease. So for example, like in my own town, what happened was they had sewage get into our river water, which is also part of what draws off of, for some towns and countries, drinking water and other water. We were on boil orders. We were on, bottled water only for drinking. You can't pull it, out of the water sources here, the watersheds. So you can twist these things and use something like that to then cascade it all the way down around. So they can claim that, well, with all of this flooding, with all of this stuff, it's going to spread diseases, it's going to spread other things, it's going to make more fungal things come up, it's going to make more this, more that. And I'm not saying that it all makes sense or that it actually matches totally with reason or facts or reality, because most of these agendas don't match with facts and reason and reality. And so, but if they claim this, for example, they could claim an environmental detriment of some sort to health. So they could say, well, again, this storm came through, and so we're going to have to isolate, shut down your town because of the sewage infection that has infiltrated the water system, so on and so forth. So none of your restaurants can be open. We saw that back in December where I live. We saw that. The restaurants couldn't be open because of the orders. Now technically you could, because you could boil the water, you could bring in bottled water. We have spring water around here. There were other options that they could use, but with all the restrictions that restaurants have to start with, the food industry has, but it also cut down on a lot of things. So there were a lot of things that weren't being made. There were a lot of things that weren't being done because of that, food-wise, that wasn't available for people. Trying to keep things sanitary with your workers and employees and things like that. Another aspect that was challenging it. So they can claim this environmental detriment has happened, or this environmental event is a detriment to health, and then call for lockdowns. And that's kind of, you see, they do these weird connections on things, and that's how they try to get away with that. We will see then transportation halts. Well, you can't transport because this is shut down or that is shut down, or it's unsafe, like with the cattle. They're already doing that with the cattle right now. Can't transport the cattle across state lines because of the avian bird flu aspect, which means you're not going to get meat in your markets, which means your cost of meat is going to skyrocket. Somebody just said that on one of our local town posts recently, and they're like, have you seen the cost of meat in the supermarket? And I'm like, why are you buying from the supermarket when we have all these farmers here? It's like, doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever. It, but that's what they're going to try to do, is these transportation halts. And of course, we've already seen some of the laying of the platforms for that, right? If you get a massive storm, for example, down in Boston Harbor, in that area where we had the Francis Scott Key Bridge go out, and you get backups in there because of some storm, and then it becomes, again, stuff gets wrecked, stuff gets trashed, and then all of a sudden they're going to claim, well, this is a health issue, this is a health problem here. So we have to watch for those things. There's going to be probably damages to our supply chain happening. And that's where it gets really challenging. Again, that's where you want to have your backup plans. Do you know how to wild forage? Do you have a garden going? Do you know who your local farmers are? What will it take to get there? Some of these things that are environmentally done, they will shut down power. They will shut down a lot of things. And if they have power shut down, you're not going to have gas, which means you're not going to have gas for generators. You're not going to have gas to go drive places to get things. It's going to be one of those things. And I'm not saying it's going to last a long time, because I don't think they can do it for extended period of times. I don't think they'll be able to get away with that, especially with as many people who are bringing facts and truth and things out as we have today. But they can definitely restrict resources. And if you interrupt supply chains and you make it so that people can't travel to bring product into places, that is going to create probably some challenges. That's going to get people rethinking some things. So again, we want to kind of look at that. And they're going to claim that these restrictions, well, this is necessary to also solve financial issues. See, again, it's playing in financial, the health, all of that kind of interweaves and interreacts. Now, I'm not saying that's the truth, but that's going to be another thing, because they've already put that out there in the news that they've drained the resources, they've drained the reserves on things, and so with these restrictions, we're not going to be able to allow the truckers to transport stuff because we can't afford the fuel in their trucks. So that's another area that we're going to have to pay attention to and see that coming out in there. So here again, we want to think, well, what are our backups? What are the options that we have in here? So definitely some things to keep in mind from those overall influences. Now, from May 1st to May 20th, we have restrictions that bring out, actually, it's going to have a twist on it. It brings out true abundance and solutions because the more people are restricted and you tell them they can't do stuff, the more creative they're going to be. The more that they're going to open up that flow of creativity, they're not going to have anything else to do. So they're going to start brainstorming on things and they're going to start tuning into that inner abundance of, hey, well, I may not have a lot, but I've got enough to get through the next couple of weeks, or I've got enough to do this. I mean, even in my lifestyle, the way I live, which is so minimalist, I still have a box of, like, seeds and stuff like that that I keep that would allow me to survive for probably 2 or 3 weeks easily if I couldn't access or purchase any food whatsoever. It would probably last me, yeah, probably at least 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, depending on how I rationed it, and it's very high density foods, um, and seeds and things like that that balance, a lot of the necessity nutrients for my body. So those things are always available, and that's the interesting thing. Once people start to do that creativity and they come into the abundance on things, they start to unfold solutions. They're naturally connected to divine presence. They're naturally connected to God. They're naturally connected to the soul self energy. And of course, once we connect to that energy, now we also have another aspect that opens up in there, which means we're getting that divine assistance. We're opening up possibilities because we're connected to that. So it's very interesting to see how that cascades around. So I think if they try this, again, it's not going to have the results that they necessarily want, um, even if we can do it, but it never hurts to have the backup. I look at it and I say, having my backup is almost like insurance that it won't happen. If you're prepared for it, there's very little chance that you're going to need it. But if you're not prepared for it, then that's when it's going to happen. When you're resisting it, when you're denying it, when you're in the arrogance, um, you're separated from divine source, from God. And then, that's when things happen, is when we get into that state. So we also want to see, or will see probably during this first 3 weeks of May, an increase in values and principles and ethics and an increase for responsible action. Again, because people are going to feel that pinch. So, if they come in and they embrace that responsibility, they'll be able to get through that pinch. They'll be able to get through that tight squeezing time in there. And that's going to shift things. And again, if you lock people down, what does that do? That brings them back to looking at each other, having conversations with each other. It brings them down into things of value that don't cost anything, and they start to remember, oh yeah, wasn't it actually really cool when we all kind of got together and had a game night, or we all got together and we did this, and we all sat around the campfire, and it was really simple and it was really inexpensive, and people start remembering that, and then they start realizing, yeah, I don't need some of these extra fancy things anymore. Hey, why don't we make this regular again? And then it's again starts to build that God energy, the spirit energy, the soul energy in there. And that changes things. That changes things a lot. We will see also, though, during this time, power battles coming up with leaders and influential people. So they're coming into the forefront there, and there's going to be a push for total control. So again, if people are not giving them the reaction that they want, the leaders that are in dictatorial styles or, these heavy control communist format patterns, they're going to get even more controlling. It's like, oh, you're not suffering enough. So, what if we What if we shut down bank accounts for a couple of days and your automatic payments can't go through, and then that creates other issues and stresses people out. Maybe that'll stress you out enough to, do something that we want. So again, these power battles going on, and there's this push for the thing. So we'll see a rise in who the dictators and the tyrants are, who's operating under that style, what they want to implement versus the real leaders that are there. So you're going to have, you've got the leaders out there that are very pro the people. They're trying to do the best thing that they can for their country. And then you have the leaders out there that are just trying to control everything. They're part of the elite structures. They're part of the corruption systems out there. So you have these two factions. So I think that we really will see some battles come up between those two different types of leaders. And again, you have your elected leaders and you have your installed leaders that are going on there. So, every now and then they get an actually elected leader in one way or another. But the thing that we have to watch out for in this is that these tyrants, these dictator leaders, what they do is that they offer the illusion of freedom for compliance. And that's a very interesting piece. It's kind of like, we all have the right to go shop at a store, right? We all have the right to go to the market and buy our food if that's what we want to do. And so they will come through and they will enforce something and they will say, well, if you can no longer go to the market and buy your food without wearing a mask and showing that you have every current vaccine on you. And if you can't show that, you don't get in the store, you don't get food, you can't buy anything. And if you don't do those things, we will put a block on your account. You won't be able to spend any of your money. They're doing this actually in other countries. You can actually go into different countries and this is actually already implemented. So it's not like it's some crazy, wild, schemed up idea. And then they'll come through and say, but you know what, if you comply with us and you do this one thing, or you wear this, then we will allow you into the store. So they're giving you the illusion that you have the freedom to go shop in a store because you wear a mask and you show a full history of vaccine records to them. So they're giving you the illusion of issuing you freedom, but you don't have any freedom because it's all manifested, it's all controlled, it's all dependent. And the reality of it is you have the right to shop in that store and spend money and buy food anyways, with or without that compliance. And so that is where it's really going to kind of start to, we're going to see that duality kind of bubble up again in things. And we have to be careful because, we don't want to just give it away and say, oh, okay, because you put this restriction on, I can't do this anymore. We have to be very, very careful of that because then they just take more and more and more things away. And then then it's not freedom when they're giving you something that you already have a right to. Yeah. And when they're controlling the whole thing based on conditions. So we want to be very careful of that. So they're offering the illusion of freedom and not actual freedom in there. And that mixes a lot of people up because the people who aren't thinking come back and say, oh, well, we're so privileged that we get to do this. We're so privileged that we get to walk into the store. Well, no, that's a human right pretty much. I mean, you have a right to food, you have a right to air, you have, a right to water, you have a right to basic needs of things. And so definitely an interesting piece where people's minds get twisted around and they think um, so distorted, and they think that they accept it as a gift instead of realizing that it is an absolute control mechanism that's in there. physical and financial vulnerabilities get magnified during these first 3 weeks. Remember, I talked about that in the monthly influences that runs through the whole month. That's going to get magnified in those first 3 weeks. Also, weather and storm issues. I think that's actually probably going to run throughout most of the month, but definitely the first 3 weeks, and the storms that hit, we're probably going to see a lot of upheaval, a lot of destruction coming through from them. We're probably going to see shelters that are activated, and they're going to want this. And we have to think, again, a lot of this stuff, they are already proving the cloud seeding. They're already proving weather manipulation isn't just some theory, that all the technology is there. Tectonic plates are there, to create earthquakes, to create different things. That is all there, and it's all actively being used. So even Dubai came through that big flood that Dubai had, and they came out and they actually stated that indeed they were cloud seeding right as that's, they were cloud seeding right before that storm hit. And the problem is they can't control it. I've talked about this in the past, and especially in desert regions, what happens is you get such a huge amount of rain. So like they got like, you know, a month's worth of rain or a year's worth of rain or whatever it was in like a day. And they can't control it with the cloud seeding. So they cloud seed to try to make it rain, and then what happens is it over rains and it saturates, and you get so much rain coming down at one time that the earth can't absorb it. It can't handle it. So you're actually destroying the earth. You're actually being very, very destructive to the earth's components and how it works naturally, and disrupting all of that. And then that's when all of the flooding and other things happen, because it's too much. It's too much for it to handle. So when we start to look at these weather patterns, and then, again, if they're using part of that as part of the climate emergency, they have to create some pretty good storms to create a climate emergency, which is not hard to do these days. We've seen that proven. They will then go to saying, okay, well, we're going to open up shelters, and we'll use the shelters. And then what happens is the shelters become used to desensitize people. And when I say that, to desensitize them to the government, in other words, it makes them conditioned to accepting government handouts. It makes them conditioned to receiving, a portion of something. This is your portion, the next portion, here's your portion, and everybody's getting the same thing. And that is not a good thing, because, if everybody's getting the same thing and somebody's allergic to what you're getting them, they need something different than that. But that's what it does, is it desensitizes people, and it gets them used to, being in a gym with a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand other people, and being okay with just having a mat on the floor. Because on one hand you say, well, yeah, I'm really grateful for that in these conditions, but they're trying to get you to get used to living that way. That's part of the purpose of that. It's not because they really care about taking care of you in a storm, which, by the way, they created. you know, they created the problem. Now they're trying to, they got your reaction, and now they're trying to present you with the solution to the problem that they've already created. So you got to be very, very careful of these. And that's where it starts to get scary, because here again, now you're in a communist type structure, and people don't think of it that way, because they're just thinking, oh, this is an emergency situation. But they don't realize that they're being groomed to accept that as a permanent lifestyle or a permanent way of being. And again, we think these things, but think of how much, 4 or 5 years ago, you thought you'd never see that has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And things that we never thought we'd see implemented, lockdowns, shutdowns, all these things have been done and are happening. Whether we want to admit it or not, they're happening, So again, this is all about handouts, controlled, issued supplies, forced isolation. You've got to stay here. You can't leave the shelter area. It's not safe. Or you've got to stay in your home. It's not safe. You can't leave. You can't go places. So I think all of this is also covering for greater transitions that are desired. And can I speak fully to the details of those? I can't. I think a lot of people have ideas. We've heard about the great, New World Order stuff that they want implemented by 2030 and all of this stuff. And I think, I think they're having a harder and harder time implementing it, but I think they're a lot closer than we realize to implementing it as well. So um, these are other pieces that we'd be fools if we totally ignored them, honestly. We would be. Not again, not to be in the doom and gloom, but you can't change something until you're willing to acknowledge that it's existing and that it's present and that it's active in some way there. So I think definitely, here again, it's the transitions. It's getting you used to here's a emergency handouts, here's emergency payouts, here's compensation for not being able to work. That is all grooming towards being just paid by the government to a complete socialist communist style system where we will issue you your money, providing that you have behaved yourself and not said something that we don't like, or posted something that we don't like, or that our robots and our programs are picking up as inappropriate, even if it's totally appropriate. So these are going to be, we don't want to just accept these systems because it seems acceptable in the moment. And this is where if we're living in a way where we're taking what we need, but we're not taking any more than that, if we are continuing to find our other options besides those handouts, we're going to be a lot better off. So again, these backup options become very, very important in things. Now that last week and a half of the month, the 21st through the end of the month, we have a lot that we're going to be learning from the experiences that we have from each other. So I think a lot of information is going to come out. I think we're going to have some huge information dumps, truth dumps coming out at that time. Again, the power battles are going to continue during that time. And and I think we're going to find that people will be learning just how much power has been turned over to the government and why and how that power is so dangerous. And a lot of people don't realize it. Again, I go back to the things I'm really glad that they put in our Constitution in Maine, the state of Maine, that we have the right to grow our own food, because in a lot of states, they're not going to have that right. And those are the types of things where when people are trying to control the food source and they decide to make some of these bigger changes, people are all of a sudden going to say, what do you mean I can't have my own garden for my own food? And what do you mean you're going to have a droid watching me to see whether I eat something out of my yard or not? People don't realize what they've turned over. They don't realize the power that government has to seize property. They don't realize the power that government already has to shut down your accounts, to have you removed from your jobs, So again, if we have the backups in place, I think we're in a much stronger place. I think we have, there's a lot of really great people out there bringing the truth out, doing the research, doing the studies out there, bringing a lot of information forward. And we need to pay attention to those people that are bringing stuff up, or at least do our own research, at least take a look and say, is this true? Is there facts based in this? And not just rely on the proverbial experts that are put on our TV set, because a lot of them actually aren't experts. They're actually not that knowledgeable. They're issued these degrees and they haven't earned them in a lot of cases. So we have to be careful. We do want to do our own research, no matter where the information is coming from. Because also during this last week and a half, there's a lot of lies, a lot of manipulation, a lot of deception energy. It's super strong during this time. And we're going to see a lot of governments distorting the facts and things. Again, they're going to stick together in their little criminal networks that they have going. And there's going to be no ethics and no morals about what they're going to do. There's no, the bad guys don't stop carrying guns, and the bad guys don't stop lying because they don't care, because they don't believe in God or have no connection to God to start with. So they're not going to play by anybody's ethical rules. And that's part of the point that people have tried to get across. Yes, I believe very strongly that there are peaceful paths through. I believe that very, very strongly. But on the other hand, we would be absolutely ignorant and stupid to think that the criminals are going to play by the rules, because they're not. They've never played by the rules because they don't care about the rules, and they're trying to alleviate the rules so that they can have power and control. So we would be absolutely foolish to think that they're going to play some ethical game. And what magnifies that is if they're not being held accountable along the way, if there's no punishment, so per se, for the crime, there's nothing to keep them from doing the crime. There's nothing to make it unappealing to them. All they find is the appeal in it. So we have to be very careful of that. We're going to see a lot of sabotaging of people, truth, integrity, the non-compliant. Um, and yes, that's going to expose the criminal networks and methods and workings and things like that in the process of that sabotaging. But that's, this is equivalent to when they did such heavy censorship 4 years ago. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. How do we sabotage people that are in the truth industry? Oh, well, we just shadow ban them, which means they can see their post on their wall, but nobody else can see their post. They're basically invisible, even though they can see their post. And so that's a sabotage. So they sabotage people from making, well, we'll just shut down their accounts, and so we'll claim that they are treasonous or whatever else, and we'll just shut down their accounts because we don't like them telling the truth, and therefore they won't be able to receive the donations or the fundings from their followers. Those are the types of things that we see. We won't allow them to shop in the stores. We won't allow them to do certain things. So again, this is why we've got to get off of this credit system. We've got to get off of putting everything on a credit card, because when we do that, we make ourselves that much more vulnerable. We make ourselves, now I realize in today's society, it's almost impossible not to use one at some point, but we don't have to use it for everything. And a lot of people will do that because they're being encouraged to do that. They're receiving rewards to do that. Think of every rewards program. Every time you go into the market and you put in your number for the store, right? So that you can get your discounts or whatever like that. They're tracking everything that you eat, everything that you have. And so when they go over to a totally digital system, if they can manage to make that happen, then what happens is it will come up and say, well, no, this person's already bought X amount of candy or chips or whatever this month, and so they're not allowed to buy any of that, and it blocks them, and it won't allow the purchase to go through. They go to the gas station, and it'll be like, oh, well, you won't be able to fill your tank up at the gas station because you've already exceeded your mileage use or your fill up use for your period of time. And these things are in motion. This is not a dystopian, far-fetched thing out there. These things are already happening and in motion and active in various parts of the world. So again, we want to be very careful. So we're going to see these sabotaging attempts, whether it's attacks, whether it's DOS attacks, or any of these things coming through. We're going to see a lot more of that ramping up in May. The solutions are going to, again, get presented by those that are we're going to see some solutions come up from all of this in here, because again, those people who are really paying attention to things, they're going to go in and they're going to get creative, and they're going to find their own solutions to things. So the solutions then will start coming up by those people who are focusing on quality and on integrity. And they're going to say, okay, you don't want us to shop at the stores? Well, we're going to start just exchanging things. Or my neighbor is going to let me go pick some stuff out of their garden, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to help them. And this is why they've tried to tax the barter system, The barter system wasn't always taxed. Matter of fact, it's one of the most absurd taxes there is out of all the taxes we have. And it was specifically to try to control people from uh, being able to stay out of the system. So there's going to get solutions presented. People will just say, yeah, I'm just going to put this out here, and if anybody wants any, they can have it. Um, and it's not a gift, and it's not a barter, and it's not this, and it's not that. So the solutions are going to come up where people, have that quality and that focus on integrity. And those are the things also, as money gets tighter, people are going to look for quality things. Now, we're also going to see a big increase that last week and a half on narcissists trying to prove their superiority. So you have, when you look at world leaders, I mean, every one of them almost has narcissistic or psychopathic tendencies, even if they've got a good heart and they're trying to work for the people. A lot of them still have that. But you're going to see this attempt to prove their superiority coming up. So when you see people trying to prove that superiority, they're probably coming from more of that narcissism energy in there. They're needing attention is what it is. It's not that they really want to present you with solutions or that they really are better. They're just needing attention. And so we could see some pretty dramatic displays for attention come out. People that are just acting a role to get attention. We see that a lot when you see the people like Dylan Mulvaney and stuff, which has been used, the guy that dresses as a girl a lot of times, and we see that he's an actor. He's an actor, and he gets paid big for looking like a woman. He pays big to dress up and to do that, and to virtue signal. And so we're probably going to see a lot of Soros funding being dumped into these virtue signal displays of dramatic attention. All these people that you see them in Walmart doing these things and videotaping themselves. The people who are truly, truly mentally ill aren't videotaping themselves. And these people wouldn't be doing those things if they weren't getting paid for it. And they can't get paid for it unless they have video proof of themselves doing it. So, this is not the average person out there. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's not the average person. When you see these dramatic displays of attention, we're dealing with narcissists who want attention, who are being paid for it in there. And you'll see also a lot of celebrities being used to push agendas, I think, during this last week and a half. Again, we saw that with a lot of things in 2020 around the pandemic. And it was like, well, how about if we put this celebrity out there and they tell you it's a good thing to do, and they guilt you into not doing it because you're, going to be such a detriment to people and things like that. So I think we're going to see that resurfacing of celebrities used for agendas. Now, as far as actions are concerned and the actions that are going to be going down, we're going to see more so-called fundraisers to help those that are in need. And we need to be really, really careful of these, because a lot of these so-called fundraisers and NWOs, NGOs, I guess not NWO as much as NGOs, these things that appear to be nonprofit and things like that, we've got to be really careful of them, because what happens is a lot of them goes into, I can't remember the name of the place, Blue something, and then it goes into funding political campaigns, and it doesn't go to the organization, and it doesn't go to the people that need it. So we have to be very careful of these so-called fundraisers that are probably going to surface throughout the whole month of May. And here again, they want to give, they want to help people, they want to take care of them when somebody is truly in need. So it's it's that bleeding heart aspect. We see it all the time. St. Joseph's or whatever it is, that's always got the children on there begging you to send them donations and things like that. And a lot of these organizations don't, and a lot of them are tied to criminal syndicates. So when you do your research and you get into the web of what they are connected to, you start to realize, oh my gosh, these are not about innocent children. These are not about helping cancer patients. These are not about these things. So lots of caution around that. We're going to see some that are totally fake, totally fake. You know, we see it come across the emails all the time, right? You're a beneficiary to whatever, and I've got, you know, $100 million waiting to drop in your bank account. Just give me all your information. And we know that's a scam, and then that's how you lose everything in your account. Some are going to be funding agendas, like I said, the blue, whatever it is, active blue or whatever it is, they appear to be humanitarian, have these humanitarian organizations or fundraisers or things like that. But when you do the payment system goes into this active blue or whatever it is, and that all goes to fund specific campaigns, political campaigns in there. And so it is not going to the organizations in there. And so some of them are just kind of hidden. They're hidden in the payment systems themselves in there. And you'll see it even like on Facebook. If you make a donation on Facebook or through Facebook, and they will tell you it may not go to the thing that you are donating to. And if at any time we deem that that's not the thing, or they can take and redirect your funds. It says it right there when you're donating. We can redirect your funds to any fund that we want to, any of the fundraisers, which means they will redirect from the accounts that they don't like. You might get half your money or a quarter of your money that people are donating to you, and they will put the rest of it in to fund their own organizations, their own groups, their own political agendas, and do put it into those fundraisers. So this stuff is really, really tricky stuff, and we got to pay attention. We will see on this a lot of people coming much more into deep reflection. That's going to be a big movement that we're going to see. A lot of people become more and more concerned with the soul. So people that have been very, very open-minded, we're going to see more of them coming through going, wow, I've really stepped away from my soul self, really stepped away from God. I've really stepped away from faith. I've really stepped away from these things. And a lot of deep reflection around that. A lot of people may be doing some soul searching, trying to come back into that connection and to choose that and say, you know, really some of these things I've been chasing, they're really not that valuable compared to my soul. And so actions and choices have a strong impact at this time. We want to be very careful what we're choosing, what we're doing. They're going to set a lot of energy in motion. And this can be a really good time for big things to be tackled. So that means we could see some really big moves on the proverbial chessboard, world chessboard, being played during this time. We could see, you know, big shifts and things that come about during this month. Now, as far as thoughts go, our mental state, our mental well-being in here, the 1st through the 15th, so the first half of the month, again, we have that magnification of health vulnerabilities and challenges. And when we look at that in the global political spectrum, then the WHO may try to make some really bold moves, right? We're combining that with those big moves, the health things. They may try to back it. Now, there was something recently that said that they kind of backed off of doing pushing through the pandemic treaty. I always felt like that was a bluff personally. I think that we may suddenly see them in these first couple of weeks come through and push for that, especially if somebody like Biden claims a climate emergency. And then they may use that to try to push this treaty through in there. So I think there's going to be some big, bold moves made. I think WHO is probably going to be involved. We have to be very careful. We do not want to give in to bribes and temptations during this time. Our mind may be thinking, but it would be so much easier. I've been through so much. I would just like a little ease or a little bit of pleasure or things like that. And when you're in really hard times, like just that minute pleasure, and it can be easier to give in to the bribes and the temptations. You know, again, if they couple this with agendas, you'll have a lot of people out there like, I'm going stir crazy in my home. Okay, I'll put a mask on to do this, or I'll, do that, or I'll, whatever it takes. But we don't, because the sacrifices are just so much bigger than that one little thing or that one little piece. And um, we want to be extra careful if this is coming and we're doing things and taking them out of exhaustion or desperation. And they're going to try to push us to the point of desperation, because that's when they get what they want a lot of times from people. But we have to hold out, and if we hold out, we will have much greater things than what that momentary pleasure is. It's like, if you just don't give in and you do the work that needs to be done one day, then you can have, bigger time off, you can, um, you can't afford the payoffs in there. Um, the freedom is going to increase in importance. And why does that increase in importance? Because when you restrict people, then you're going to make freedom even more important. And when you make freedom more important, people are going to say, who's going to give me freedom and who isn't going to give me freedom? And that's who they're going to get behind. And they don't want the illusionary freedom. They don't want the bribe freedom. They want the real freedom. And this going within is going to make people realize how much is illusionary and how much is true. And they're like, no, I want the real thing. I don't want fake food. I want real food, that type of thing. So we're going to see in that process, um, again, the more people feel overwhelmed, the more that freedom's going to be, the overwhelm could increase, and then the freedom becomes more important. And we're going to see more and more people breaking away from corporate structures, I think, during that time, or at least thinking about it, not necessarily doing it because it's in the thought area versus the action area. And so they're going to be thinking about, well, can we break away from corporate structures? Do we need this? Can we branch out on our own? Would we be any worse? These sorts of things, and would it be worth it to have the freedom? And so I think we are going to see some of these shifts happening, and again, that feeds in and backs the shifts in employment that I mentioned earlier on. The second half of the month, the mindset for people, again, not necessarily the action, but the mindset for people is that people are going to be more open to different options and different possibilities, and wanting to explore what else might be available. And the mindset is, where are the morals and the ethics? And that's going to be a top priority. So if they're looking at it saying, well, I could choose between these 5 different places to work, and one of them has morals and the other 4 doesn't, they're going to go to the place that has morals. And so that's going to be kind of, I think, a big game changer. And those that don't have the morals, those that are living without them, those are the people that are bringing danger. So here again, if you've got companies that are not protecting their employees when criminals walk in a store with guns and other things and want to shoot them up, they're not going to want to work there. They're not going to want to be a part of that. And if we're not holding accountability to criminals, then that danger is going to magnify. So those without them are going to become more and more dangerous. So cities are always more susceptible to that, large cities, because you've got more people who are not working with ethics and morals. They're chasing money and materialism in there. So a lot of people are going to say, well, I think I'll opt for safe instead of sorry. I think I'll opt for the place that has them, that I know is going to take care of me, over the place that doesn't care whether I get shot because they don't want to do anything. We're going to see more people probably walking away from companies where there's a lot of abuse going on, a lot of, again, supporting agendas or things like that going on, and moving towards companies that have values towards them. We're going to see people wanting to figure out how to break down hierarchies. So people are tired, I think, of the hierarchy structural. They and this aspect of more of an equality surge coming in. Now that can go two ways. I'm very pro getting rid of hierarchies in many ways because I don't go into the better or worse mentality personally. But this whole equality movement, again, is also, we have to be careful because people think, well, let's make everything equal. But what they don't realize is that when a lot of these corrupt leaders that are involved in these agendas and these criminal syndicates and all of that stuff, they want everything equal for everybody else, but they are not going to live by those standards. And so they're going to actually create a bigger division between classes that way, because it's like, nope, everybody else is going to be poor and controllable while we're going to have our little circle up here, and we're not going to live by those standards. We're not going to live in the misery we're imposing on everybody else. But you're going to see, again, this big equality surge again. And again, people need to differentiate between the concept of that and the reality of that. And that's a big thing, because the concept always sounds nice, but here again, we have to realize that people have different needs. If you just take people from a health level, right, from a physical level, different body types, different shapes, different blood types, different, all these different things, you cannot feed everybody exactly the same food, because what may be very beneficial and healthy for one person could be absolutely deadly for another person. You can't have it exactly all the same for everybody. We need to be able to have that individuality in there. So again, we have to look at those, and money is going to continue to be a challenge in these times. So I think when we think of equality, I think we want to think along the lines of people not necessarily being better or worse. Everybody has something that they can offer. Everybody has things of quality, of value. It's really more about what are their ethics, as opposed to their degrees. And there's so many variables involved in all of that. But we want to come down and say, what is how can we take care of our health? How can we balance our budget a little bit more? How can we do some of these things? And how can we maybe not feed the power structures? And I think that's maybe the real piece of breaking down the hierarchies is, how can we not feed the power structures? How can we take them from what they've become and bring them back into what they were supposed to be and rooted in, which was service? These political positions were not about going in and making billions of dollars while you were in office. They were public servants. So the public was not servants to them. They were servants to the public. And I think when we look at it from that aspect, now we can start to see where we need to focus. Now, getting into the soul self, and we're kind of getting down to the last couple of pieces here, so thanks for hanging in there with me. As we look at the soul self energy from the 1st through the 23rd, so basically the first 3 weeks, or 2/3 of the month, we have a lot of death energy coming up. Again, we mentioned that at the beginning, that ran throughout the month. So we're going to have a magnification of that death from illness and accidents showing up in there. And it's going to be particularly those two areas. But again, we have to look at those so-called accidents and realize that a lot of them may not be actually accidents. Again, especially if it's tied to somebody who's a whistleblower coming out, or who's been tied to politically influential people, chances are it's probably not an accident. I think some things are going to be made to look that way, and it's easier to do if you have somebody who's older in age, and you can say, well, it's this age-related thing, or they were having a bunch of health issues, or things like that. But the details of the story or the incidents are probably not going to add up. So I would say there will be a significant amount that will not be truly accidents, even though they're being designated as that. Also, a lot of travel connected to deaths, or deaths connected to travel, I should say. In particular, airplane issues, cruise ships, having outbreaks again on cruise ships going on, and issues with the ships themselves, mechanical issues, things like that going down. So I think travel, it's probably not going to be good during that time. I think we would be extra vulnerable to things during that time happening, and that's going to be a huge thing. And we may, I think, during this time have a lot of mentors that come forward to help us understand things, and that's going to be really great. So I think again we're going to see some true specialists, people who truly are understanding the way the body works, is understanding the way mechanical things work, and they will be coming out and discussing it. And I don't mean the intel people, because those are usually government people within our government agencies who are not operating in ethics or integrity or any of that. They're just put out there to help nourish a narrative and things. But these will be people who are doctors who are coming out and saying, look, we have these medications, or we have these protocols that have been used, in countries, undeveloped countries, and kept them very, very healthy, have worked very well. We can root things off of this. It would be much safer. And looking to past treatments where we didn't have all the things that we have today, and bringing some of that out. So I think we're going to see those true ones. Again, we have to be careful of the false ones, because there's going to be the false doctors and experts put out there as well. But I think we're going to see a lot of true mentors starting to speak up, just like we did during the pandemic, where people are like, this doesn't add up. And why are we being paid, $30,000 to put somebody on a ventilator when they don't actually need a ventilator? It's all about the money. Or we've been told to violate our Hippocratic oath, or we've been, so I think we're going to see a lot of that coming forward as well again in May. And then we have a lot of the past that's resurfacing. So I want to bring up some of the pieces of the aspects of past events, world events that have happened, that we could see coming forward at this time. We're going to see some things that will be resurfacing. And I think part of what's going to be resurfacing during this time is we're going to see people around the election stuff, the election fraud stuff. So a lot of the people that were surfaced back in 2020 around election fraud probably going to come out again. And where does that connect? I mean, they're obviously worried about that, because I just saw today, this morning, before jumping on to do this, that they have indicted 18 Republicans in the state of Arizona around election fraud, because they don't want that being brought out. They don't want it being talked about. They don't want these things. So this is backfiring on them. We saw that just recently Sidney Powell was cleared of what she was charged with. So we'll probably see her come back out in the news. I think probably Mike Lindell is going to be back in the news again. We know him, right, as the pillow guy thing. So I think we're going to see more of these voices resurfacing again, probably because it is an election year, and they're trying to clean up the voter rolls, and that's been getting worked on for several years now. Tom Fitton's been behind a lot of that stuff, pushing the states to get their voter rolls cleaned up, get the dead people off of them, all of those things, so that it's in a better condition and position. We've had a lot of things come out about the voting machines. They've been proven right in the court and the hearings and stuff like that. They've been shown right in the middle of those hearings how easily they can be hacked. So I think we have a lot of things coming up around that's going to resurface. I think one of the things that could resurface during this time will be around Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So there may be some stuff resurfacing around his death. We know there's all kinds of things. I think we're going to see stuff circulating that we'll be questioning whether he was actually killed or not, or there might be a similar instance come about. We know during that time there was a staged raid around that. We know that the CIA was involved in that, around it. So we've got that. We also will probably see a lot of stuff happening around the royal family, particularly the men in the family. We may see an attempt on Prince William's life during this time. Is it coming from his brother? I don't know. But I think we may see a scare or hear about a scare or something connected to that. And there may be some sort of struggle around the English throne happening at that time. And what part of the past is this that's resurfacing? In particular, this is the event that was known as the Wars of Roses that would be resurfacing at this time. We also could see some stuff coming up around Prince Andrew and King Charles. Now we know that they've been laying the narrative or spreading the news that King Charles may not have a lot of time left to live with prostate cancer, things like that. So there may be some preparation for his removal in some sense. I think, of course, Harry and Meghan are in the news making all kinds of fools of themselves. Being evicted from the US at times, and I don't know, that's just a crazy mess there. But I think we will see a lot happening around the royal family. Again, particularly the heirs, the male heirs of the throne that are going down in there. So, and I think particularly, again, William, Andrew, and King Charles are all going to be involved in this. And there could be particularly some things going between William and Prince Andrew, which is going to get to be very, very interesting in there. We're going to see some Marxist stuff coming back up, I think, in May. Definitely he was the founder of communism. He was one of the people that was involved in creating the Communist Manifesto. So I think the Communist Manifesto is going to be one of the big playbooks that are going to be active during the month of May. And again, one of the things I touched on it earlier that is going to be involved in that is attempts to end private property, which was very attached or connected with Karl Marx and that movement. So definitely some things to be aware of. And it's no wonder, I think, where we've had the squatters and that stuff happening, here again, who knows if they'll try to use those or get around it. I think that got called out pretty well. So we probably avoided that getting worse than it needed to be. But I think that will be one of maybe the big plays or the big forward pushes will be this attempt to end private property in there. I don't think that's going to fly well, honestly, in the long run. I think the rebellion to that would be so massive. And I think that's where, a lot of people are going to stand up against that aspect in there. We could see pieces, we could see something happening between Germany and the British as well in May. And we could see some sort of attack coming from Germany to Britain or to the British people happening during the month of May. So that's going to be something to pay attention to. I think there's going to be something resurfacing around Joan of Arc during this time. She helped the French out at one point. She was a nonconformist, and that goes hand in hand with resurfacing of things around Nelson Mandela and being held a political prisoner in his country during his time for decades, many decades. He was a political prisoner, and he was involved in armed resistance. And I think that somewhere there's going to be pieces that are going to be connecting in or parallels that might be getting made between Nelson Mandela and stuff that's happening to Trump. Love him or hate him, you have to be willing to look at the parallels in things and the repeating aspects of, with everything that's being done, is he really being treated more like a political prisoner than a presidential candidate? And people will give all kinds of justifications on both sides of the story for that. But I think we're going to see some connections. And again, I think we're going to see a lot of stuff resurface about Nelson Mandela, his movement, people speaking up, sharing quotes about him, things like that. And you've got the current president of South Africa as well, um, who is also anti-apartheid activist, and he could become heavily involved in claiming things like white supremacy, racism, reparations. And I think this is where it's going to get distorted, because when you look at some of these things like Nelson Mandela and Cyril Ramaphosa, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so please don't hold me too accountable on the pronunciation of that. Um, there's human rights. We all actually have the same human rights. Well, I mean, that does vary a little bit from country to country, but I think that they are going to use these people and their stance, and that is also going to trigger some unfavorable um, reactions that are going to turn against current political leaders in the world, because people are going to use them and distort things that they say and lie about things that they say in order to push the white supremacy, racism, reparations narrative. So I think that's all going to be resurfacing back up in May here. We know that one of the past historical things uh, for this time will also be it's when the smallpox vaccine was created during this time. So we may see more either things coming out that are issues around vaccines, or we may see that the smallpox could be one of the things that's released that comes out in the media, and then they want to push vaccines for that. Um, so we want to kind of watch, but I think there may be a connection there that's resurfacing. Um, there will probably be things coming out around the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England coming up, and we're probably going to see issues in those areas or with those churches around adultery, incest, conspiracy uh, against the king happening, and I think when we tie that in with things in the monarchy and the royal family, that we're going to see the adultery and the incest and different things like that coming out, mostly around probably Charles and Andrew in there. So in this time, we've also seen historically an offering and refusal of the crown happening, and we could see that happening again as a political move. So if something happens to Charles and he can't give, they say, well, Camilla will reign. I'm not so sure that she will. I think there may be some other issues that would come up. Now that would naturally go to Andrew, but if Andrew has all of this affiliations, which we know he has in these sexual scandals, he may choose to refuse the crown and give it to William. And it would be maybe that giving it to William that then could trigger maybe possible assassination attempts and bitterness, coming out of like Harry and Meghan and things like that. So it will be interesting to see if these are truly the parts of history that resurface in here. We're going to see a lot happening, I think, too, because it also feels like in regards of all that, there are more things that validate turning over the crown as part of the history that's coming up. But we also will have to be careful. I think we're going to see a resurface or a reemergence into the public eye of Amnesty International, which was supposed to be about freeing prisoners of conscience, stopping use of torture and the death penalty. Now, this has come up politically, both in Trump's campaign and Hillary, because this is where they're going to create some of those divisions, really get those anti-Trumpers fired up in here because Trump does want to reinstate death penalty if he's elected. Hillary has flat out come out and said, if Trump gets elected, he will kill us, meaning he will kill like the Clintons and people like that. Well, you got to look at what's behind that. If they've actually if he does get in and they're actually treasonous, the crime for treason is death penalty. So, I mean, that's just the law. That's just the law on there. But would he actually do that? I don't know that he would, because I think it would be such a it would be such a mixture, would there maybe be a couple of people that have to go through that? Maybe. But I mean, it would just look like a political retribution. The optics on it would be so horrible. I can't imagine that he would actually do that. But what I do think is because they do that double speak a lot, is that if she was elected or something, she would go straight for the death penalty for him. So I think that's going to be an interesting piece. I think that's going to come back onto the table again. We could see a heavy push by the Democratic Party, the Clintons, or some of these people come out and use this Amnesty International to try to get it put through as a self-preservation sort of thing. I think that's what they would be seeing it as, is like a self-preservation piece. And then I think we're going to see some things coming out a lot around the British territories, so in South Africa. So I think we're going to see some countries come into spotlight in May, which is going to be Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, Southern Cameroon, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So we'll have to watch and see what's happening in those countries. What we really want to look at with this, as the past things resurface, is we really want to take a look and say, how have we changed? How have we shifted? How have we reshaped ourselves in the world? And what creates a favorable future and doesn't repeat the past? Where do we want to repeat it and where don't we want to repeat it? And ultimately, what is going to create the favorable future forward, as opposed to where we've been, or just going through things and allowing people to go through the tortures that happened under communistic systems. Certainly, we don't want to repeat those things. So we want to look also to ancestral wisdom, which is going to be very key during this time. And one of the things that I think will help that is too, as people are reassessing values and priorities, is multi-generational households, peaceful tribes, primitive methods. We've seen this in some of the African cultures and tribes where, when somebody's disturbed and they're acting up, they all gather around in a circle and they hug that person and they hold that person until that anger diffuses. Now, that seems very unrealistic to some of the people on the political front. I get that. But when you look at some of these systems and you look how they don't have crime, they don't have hate crime, they don't have the discrimination, they don't have all of these other things, because they're not operating in those same ways. They operate under a different set of values and things. And can some of those things be done on a mass scale? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible, but we have to balance each thing for where it is. And one thing I do know is if we put a greater emphasis on doing things in kindness and not accepting crime and not letting that be okay, and having actual punishment or accountability for things that are done, we would shift things, and we could do it in a pretty peaceful way. It doesn't have to be all violence and war and all of that to do it. I mean, the only people who want war are the corrupt elite criminal structures, because that's how they make a lot of money. They make a lot of money very fast in wars, because of their networks. So, I mean, they're really the only ones wanting that. And I do believe we have other options. Now, the last piece on this is, again, we have that increase of weather challenges coming up at the end of the month. So again, that's really all through the month, as we know, in one part or another. And on the soul energy, so a lot of turbulence, a lot of chaos, a lot of drama, a lot of unpredictable challenges, and again, very devastating storms probably. Money and health challenges being magnified. So again, we can see where there could be some health challenges coming up as a result of that. Again, they want to use that as part of a climate narrative, and a lot of putting people in a financial hardship. If their towns are destroyed, their buildings, their homes, all of those things become destroyed because of these storms. People will probably have a harder time in the last third or week of the, I guess, last week of the month there, processing what's happening. They're starting again to get to that overwhelm point too much. And that leads people again to come back around and see God. So I think as much as they're trying to destroy people, break their spirit, break them down, um, that it's really going to turn people, but much more back to faith, to God, to the soul self, to divine source core, to look for their answers, because they're at a point where nothing makes sense. And when nothing makes sense, then that's where they're going to go. So I think that, again, it backfires on the corruption, because then people find faith and they change their mental being, they change their living structure, all of those things, and it doesn't feed and nourish the corruption. People will come to appreciate the small things a lot more, things of value, but life is going to probably feel very vulnerable, very fragile, and that's going to, again, lead people to realize, look, things are happening, people are dying, storms are going on, all of the stuff is happening, and I want whatever time I can have with family and friends. I want whatever time I can to enjoy with them, and that value, that's going to increase in value. So these non-monetary, non-materialistic things are going to increase in value in there. So that's May. It's a pactful month. We've got a couple of pactful months going on here. We're going to see things ramp up. We're going to see some challenges in there, but again, you can deal with it, and it's all how you want to deal with it. It's your frame of mind. It's whether you choose to be prepared mentally, physically, throughout these situations, to have your backup plans in, ready to go, and to really reevaluate these priorities. And as we do this and we choose to live in those ways, people around us will change too, because they'll remember that that's a possibility to do, and to just hang on there, cherish your friends, cherish your family, cherish the people that you can trust around you, because they're going to be very valuable in getting through the challenges. They're going to be very valuable in those times. So again, if you want to head over to compassioncodes.com, you can pick up your copy of the book. You can always still get it. We still got plenty of time left in the year. We're only a quarter of the way through, third of the way through, excuse me, of the year. We still got 8 months to go in here, and you can do that at compassioncodes.com. Go over to the Goods tab, select the code Journey. You'll find the links to get you directly to whether you want the ebook or the paperback book. I like the paperback because I like to, well, you can see, I like to put all kinds of markers in there to mark my pages in there. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I can always use a boost that way. It helps to get the information out there, and just to let other people see things so that they too can have that foresight and that wisdom. Take care, everybody, and I will see you in the next month.